The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is 7 p.m. in New York, 8 a.m. in Shanghai, it's midnight in London, 3 a.m. in Nairobi, and it's 4 p.m. here in Vancouver. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday International ACAC for January 8th, and today's topic is supporting LGBTQ and non-binary students. Before we get into introducing our panel that is all here with us this afternoon, morning, evening, my name is Aaron Anderson. I will be your moderator, but just a few words of technical introduction. Throughout this session today, we will be recording the session. We will be getting a chance to take some questions at the end. We'll make sure we got a lot of content to get through. We really want to get in depth of this really important topic. So if you do have questions, please, by all means, jot those questions down, and we'll take some time at the end. We've got about a 45-minute presentation here with these experts and these knowledgeable members on the participation here. And I say we want to really make some time to introduce this topic and hear from you as well. So it is going to be recorded. If there is anything you missed or you have to step aside, you'll be able to get this recording on our website following the presentation today. So let's get right into it today and introduce you to your panelists. Janie, do you want to go around the ring here and take a moment to each introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name's Jenny Digby. I'm one of the guidance counsellors at UWC Atlantic in Wales, so it's midnight for me if I'm not looking too fresh. That is accurate.
My name is Graham McNaught. I work at Taipei European School in Taiwan as a college counsellor.
I'm Susan Napo. I'm an essay coach and a trainer for counselors from Law Writing Workshop, and I'm in Detroit, Michigan in the US.
Hi, I'm Dane Rowley at California Lutheran University, where I serve as Director of International Admission.
Fabulous. So let's dive right into the agenda and talk a little bit about what we're going to be discussing today. Dane, are you going to run us through what we're going to be discussing here?
Well, I can do just a really quick snapshot. We're going to be talking about gender, and Susan's going to walk us through some really important terms, and then Graham's going to do similar for LGBTQ students and sexual identities. And then Jenny and Graham are going to provide some great information for high school counselors, that some very real down-to-earth tips. I'll kind of pick up at the end, talking a little bit more about the college search process and some things the universities can do to be more welcoming and adjust some things that we do. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some questions. We are going to be providing, this is going to be recorded. We also have a lot of resources at the end of the slide deck, more reading than you can probably handle over a long period of time. So there's a lot to be learned about this. You called us experts. I don't know if any of us would call ourselves experts, but we're all very, very passionate about these things and about these incredible young people that are often in the shadows and fall through the cracks of the process. So we're just happy that you're here and happy to be presenting with such amazing colleagues. Thanks.
Okay, I
Susan,
will dive in. So can you go back one? Because that was actually my first slide. All right, so I'm here as a parent, actually. I am a member of International ACAC. I work with counselors all the time. I work with students. But I have two children who identify as non-binary. So as a writer and as a mother who became an ally, I started writing about this because I couldn't find what I was looking for to read. I couldn't find the resources I needed. And so I like to always start these discussions with, what do we think of as gender then and now? So for those of us who are probably older than 35, gender often was a discussion of gender opportunity, gender roles, gender equality. Boys and girls can do the same thing. Men and women can have the same jobs. How do we parent? That's part of the story. But now we're talking about gender identity. That's what we're talking about today. That's the present. That's what our young people are talking about. And when they talk about gender, the assumption is in many cultures that gender roles are equal. Gender identity has a lot of variation. So we can talk about cisgender, transgender, non-binary. The future, I don't know what the future holds. So I like to say that it's our responsibility as the grown-ups in the room to educate ourselves, to support the young people in our lives, whether we're counselors, whether we're at the college and university side. And that's where we like to start. So we'll move on with some terminology. That's the next slide. Gender is who I am. Sexual orientation, which Graham is going to talk a little bit more about, is who I'm attracted to. It's important not to confuse these. Sometimes it's hard not to confuse these, but being cisgender, being transgender, and I'll define those terms in a moment, does not necessarily dictate who one is attracted to. So we use a lot of words. There's a lot of terms. And on the next slide, I have a list of some of these terms. We have resources with all of this information. This is way too much to read right now. Assigned gender, so that's a common term for this, is the gender that a baby is given, is assigned at birth. It's usually based on sex characteristics. It's biology. Gender identity, though, is who we know we are. And gender expression or presentation is how we show that to the world. So for some people who'd be considered cisgender, all of those things line up. I was assigned female at birth. When you look at me, you think I am a woman and I identify as a woman. If I am transgender, it means that I identify differently from what you might think you see or what my biological sex would indicate. People use the terms genderqueer, they use the terms transgender. There are a lot of different words. You don't have to know them all, but you have to understand that there are different words for things that you may or may not understand, and it's okay. But do the research, be curious, be willing to be a little bit surprised by what you find out. And that leads to pronouns, because pronouns are the way we identify ourselves outside in the world. So these are third-person pronouns. It's how I speak about another person. She, her, and hers, these are familiar. He, him, and his. They, them, and their is often used by people who consider themselves non-binary. Binary is male or female. Non-binary means I'm not male or female. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm somewhere in the middle of that continuum. It could mean, in fact, one of my children says, I'm not male, I'm not female, I'm that, and sort of points off in another plane. So they and them are pronouns that many people use. Some people use other pronouns, and if they do, our responsibility to respectfully use those pronouns. We have to educate ourselves, as I've said, and also if we feel uncomfortable, we have to realize that that's about us. It's not about the other person. And especially as educators and counselors, it's important to realize that part of our responsibility is to get over what makes us uncomfortable to make the young people in our lives more comfortable. So if we were to practice this, which we're not going to do right now, but if you're looking at these slides later, these are some silly examples. You can make your own, but you match the pronoun to the verb. Bugs Bunny just texted me, they are on their way. It may sound a little funny. I'm a writer. I teach writing. People tell me, well, that's not proper English. And I say, you know what? You can get used to just about anything. You just have to hear it enough times. Language evolves, and we can learn this. So then the next question is, well, what are the implications for schools? What is the implication for individuals? How does this work? So we're talking about young people. This is a time of exploration. It's a time of recognition. Our teens are learning who they are. They're figuring it out in so many ways. Gender's not the only thing they're figuring out. And they're finding the truth for themselves. And in order to support them properly, emotionally, and to keep them safe, both emotionally and physically, we need to honor that truth and encourage them to tell us who they are, not for us to tell them, well, here's who I think you are. That's so important. And that leads to what the implications are for schools, because we have to think about our organizations. And that, that's where I get into assumptions. We think we know things. We think we all, a child enters our school and identified as a male person. I am a boy. And then in the next year, they tell you I'm non-binary. You can't look at them and say, no, you're not. Perhaps they change their name. Perhaps they change their pronouns. It's important to communicate. It's important to be clear. As a counselor especially, to be the advocate for your students with teachers and others in the school who may or may not understand this, may feel uncomfortable. What I like to tell people is you don't have to like it. You don't have to get it, but you do have to do it. that's not up for discussion. It's hard enough to be a teenager. We don't need to be judging on identity. So what does this mean for communities? And this I really think is the big picture, and it's why we're here. I say that there's 4 levels of engagement in a community. One is dismissal. Dismissal is this doesn't exist. These different gender identities, being non-binary, being transgender, it's not a thing. It's not real. I don't have to engage with it. I don't have to pay attention. I don't have a lot to say to that. It's not even worth arguing often. I can say, like, here is exhibit A, a person who is in my life, but some people dismiss. Okay, we're not going to worry about that. Next level is tolerance. Tolerance is a funny word. It's been used well. I've had many discussions with people over whether tolerance is a good word or a bad word. I think tolerance, unfortunately, has come to mean a little bit of a place of judgment. I have a space and I will tolerate you. I will permit you to be in this space. So the concept sort of started out with good meaning, but it has come to mean I have the power, I have the authority, and I'm going to allow you to be here, but you are other, you are different. Next is acceptance. Acceptance is what I would consider the most important place to begin. For many families, this is about as far as they can get. Acceptance is, okay, I accept that you're trans, or I accept that you're non-binary, I accept this, I accept that, I hear your name, I hear your pronouns. In my house, at my dinner table, great, we're good. But outside of here, I can't really do anything else. So, okay, so you can bring your partner home. So we can talk about, what's going on in your life. That's okay. We can talk about your gender. We can talk about your life. But nothing really, not too much outside. Engagement is what we're doing here. Engagement, in my experience, was getting a cab from the airport and talking to the driver, and she's saying, so, you have kids? Yes, I have 3 kids, boys or girls. Non-binary and a son. And she says, well, what is non-binary? And I explained it. I don't have any obligation to do that. I'm never going to see her again. I don't know her. She doesn't know my children. I could be completely making this up. I have no long-term relationship with this person, but I know that someone in her life is non-binary. She just doesn't know who it is yet. And when that person says something to her, whether it's a friend or a family member or a friend whose child is telling them this and they're trying to explain it to her, she's not going to have to say, what does that mean? Because she already had that conversation with me. So my feeling is that as the counselors, as the people in the universities and the colleges and the schools, as a supportive people with these youth that we're talking about, it is our responsibility to find ways to engage, to look for ways to engage, to be the educators, because it doesn't hurt me if someone asks me a ridiculous question, and Graham will talk a little bit about what some of those questions might be, but it doesn't hurt me. You can ask me, what does that word mean? What does that term refer to? How does this work? How does that work? Whatever. I might tell you it's an obnoxious question. I might tell you, please don't ask anyone that again. But it doesn't hurt me personally. So that's engagement, and I encourage everyone to find ways to engage. And finally, I say practice. So here's something you can practice. I went to a webinar today. Susan Nappo was one of the panelists. She has a non-binary child, and their name is Miriam. Practice. Give it a shot. On to you.
That's great, Susan. Thank you.
I want to talk about engagement in terms of the language around sexuality. And I want to start by talking about why we need to talk about this now. The first set of acronyms from LGB right the way through to LGBTQI shows how fast-paced the language around sexuality is evolving. When I was young, it was LGB and LGBT were around for a long time. In the last few years, we've expanded beyond LGBTQI+. So it's kind of it's expected that we won't know some of the language, and I don't think we should worry about not knowing the language. because it is fast-paced, it is evolving. And I think also we are kind of behind a lot of the young people that we work with in schools and in colleges. I think they have the confidence to use a lot of the language because they are around that language a lot more through social media, through television, through the internet. So they have the confidence a lot younger than, say, even 10 years ago or 5 years ago to use language to describe themselves at a younger age than say I did when I was young, when I was saying that I was gay and I didn't have any other language around to use. So young people aren't just saying that they're lesbian or gay now, they're talking about being queer, genderqueer, non-binary, and so on. And I think, you know, we have to work with that. We have to go with that because of having the knowledge availability, they are feeling less isolated from their peers. So they're not waiting to go to university to find themselves like I did, to discover who they are. And they're finding that their peers are also welcoming of them, also not fazed by who they are and who they're saying they are. So that means it's coming into schools in terms of the discussion around, you know, the playground, etc. But it also means that they're coming to teachers and counsellors and asking questions, maybe in a way that they didn't when I started being a counsellor 10 years ago. I had a teacher come to me recently who had a student ask them about being non-binary. They said they were non-binary and the teacher didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to respond to it. They didn't know if they could respond to it. So they came to me to find out how to talk about it. So on the next slide, I'm going to give you some simple things we can start with. So if we're aiming for an affirming language, I think one of the simplest things to do to begin with is to understand that when we're talking about sexuality, we need to use adjectives and not nouns. It's not acceptable to use a phrase like Jamie is a transgender. And I hear these phrases like that. I hear them spoken like that. I'm in the community and people know, I know things about this. So when they talk to me about someone that they think is whatever they think they are, they do say things like he's a gay or she's a gay, and that's not the way that we should be talking about sexuality. It should be an adjective, because an adjective is more affirming. It doesn't focus on the identity as being one single identity. It's just one part of that person's life. And that would be a step forward if someone's talking to you, if you were able to begin with that simple step. There are exceptions though, obviously, because LGBT, I mean, when I was saying it originally, I stumbled a little bit because there's so many letters in what's called the rainbow alphabet. You know, I put LGBTQ+, there's more than the Q, there's more than the I, and so on. And in fact, the Q doesn't necessarily mean queer. To some people, it means questioning. So even in a community, there are different ways of using some of the words. Excuse me. So I think it's important to understand that there's not one single word that applies to everybody within the LGBTQ community. Some words are accepted by others and not other people. As a gay man, I don't like being called queer. I know many gay men do like being preferred to be called queer. So what I suggest is you take your cue from the person you're talking to. Whatever word they use, that's the word that you need to use when you're talking to them about their sexuality. Not when you're talking to other people, that's a different thing, it's a different matter. And also context is important, because within the communities, words like queer are acceptable because they are being reappropriated, but outside the community, they might be used as a term of abuse. So you have to be careful how you use those words. So again, ask the person or the people that you know in school or in college, what's the appropriate term for you to use, because it might be different from the term that they want to use and the context. What I wouldn't say though is, don't ask them about their sexuality. It's not okay to say, are you gay? Because one of the things, or lesbian, because one of the things that's really important is that they might not be ready to tell you, they might not know, they might not have the vocabulary, they might not be clear about how they feel. You might think you know how they feel. They might present themselves as an effeminate gay man, but they don't yet, or a gay boy, but they don't yet know that they haven't identified as gay yet. So respect their preferences in terms of what you want, what they want you to call them, and how you can use those words when you're talking about their sexuality. This slide is up because I want to show you there's a resource that you can go to. I mean, I'm not going to go through all the different terms that you shouldn't say and terms that you should say, but the safezoneproject.com is a website that has some resources on it, but also has like this, like a list of words that are maybe less good to use, words that are better to use. Like, it's not good to say normal people when you're talking about transgender and other people. It's transgender and cisgender people, as Susan says, because normal implies abnormal, and within the community, that's not acceptable. So if you're not sure about particular words, go to this website and you'll see some choices. I also want to talk a little bit about coming out, because if a kid comes out to you in school, there's a misconception that's it done, they're out, everyone knows. Gay people come out. I'm still coming out. I'm 50, and I came out first time when I was 15. So 35 years later, I'm still coming out. I come out, when I walk down the street with a partner. I come out if I snuggle on an airplane. I come out when people ask me who my wife is or my girlfriend is, and I say, well, I don't have one. I come out every job I have. So young people have the same coming out. So it's not a one-time only thing. So don't assume that if they come out to you, they are out to any other people. And don't assume also, we have kids in my school who are, out to their friends in whichever sexuality that they have. They're out to teachers because they're part of the Pride Alliance group that we have in school. They took part in our Pride Day at school. They present to all the students in school, and yet their parents don't know. And that might seem really strange, but they have chosen within a community to be out, but not within their family. So please don't assume that everybody they know knows just because a large group of people know. And it also means that you don't have permission to talk about it. It's not a child protection issue. It's not a safeguarding issue. It's not something you have to talk to parents about. You shouldn't talk to the parents about it unless you've got a concern about some activity that's happening because of the sexuality. It's up to that young person to tell who they want to tell and why they want to tell them. And my last kind of main slide is really to think about things that are on my mind at the moment in terms of the transition from school to university. And this came up because we're talking to students in our Pride Alliance group about language use and about words that they found abusive. I'd recently been spoken to in an abusive way by an adult. I was talking about it, and one of the boys in the group was shocked that I found that particular word, the F word, offensive. And in discussion, it came out he'd never, ever heard any offensive words used towards him or anyone else. And therefore, school was a really safe environment for him. And he didn't expect to be offended by them when he got to university. And we tried to have a discussion with him about, well, it is going to happen, or it's likely to happen, and how are you going to respond to that? And he was like, well, I'm not going to have to worry about it because it's never going to happen. He just couldn't comprehend how anyone would be abusive towards him. Or disrespectful towards them. I think we have a duty as college counsellors to talk to students about what might happen at university and how it might not be as safe an environment as some schools like my school is. They might also come from a very conservative family or conservative culture. Some Asian culture is very conservative. Taiwan's quite liberal. But other countries, Singapore's quite conservative, for example. And moving to an open and liberal culture, which is great, they're going like I did to explore their sexuality, to explore who they are, but not having had a chance to do that in school in some cases, there's some dangers, or there's some issues that are maybe need to be looked at about how they're going to navigate this safely, in terms of relationships that they might have or sexual health matters that maybe they haven't talked about. Like a kid in a candy shop, suddenly everything's available, and how do you deal with that? And then coming back home, coming back to that conservative family or culture can be quite a difficult thing to do. And I think we can maybe talk to our students about that. You go to university, and as Janie says, you're kind of like you're discovering who you are. You're finding out, about the person that you want to become. Like I did, I left home at 17 to do that. But going back home to my family, nothing was ever talked about, and it felt quite stifling. And I think that can be really difficult for some students to navigate. I don't have answers to all of these questions, but I think it's things that we need to think about and discuss with students if they are out to us in school. And the very last slide is basically part of a presentation that students in my school did to the whole school about our school Pride Alliance group, which they started with another teacher in February. I wanted to show it because this is one slide about why it exists. And their top bullet point was they exist to have a sense of community. And I want to say that having a Pride Alliance group has been great for these students and some of the teachers who are in the group with them, because with their peers who are welcoming of them, they ask a lot of what questions. What what are you? Who are you? What do you do? In our group, it's a lot of why, how questions. How do you feel? And sharing of experiences. And that's a different kind of support than they get from their supportive peers. So so if you have a chance to start like a Rainbow Alliance group or a Pride Alliance group, please do. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham, for sharing some of your story and helping us through what can be a complicated path for some of us. But I think just being here and hearing some of this is a really good, important step. Dane, are you going to talk a little bit now about onto our next topic?
Actually, Janie's turn. You're up.
Janie, here we go, navigating, and then I'm going to unmute you, Janie, because I had some feedback earlier. There we go, Janie, you're on. Pardon me.
So I understand why you would mute me for doing it. I get very excited. And it's after midnight, so I'm not sure what's going to come out. I've made lots of notes in the hope that I'll kind of keep it together, but we'll see. I guess Dane described what I'm going to do as down-to-earth counselling tips, but I'm not sure if that's at all accurate, but I'll do my best. I think as a counsellor, and I appreciate that, especially now in my current school, I have a huge amount of privilege in the fact that it's a super rainbowy school. 31% of our kids identify as somewhere on the queer spectrum, so it's very, very tolerant. Not even, it's a super accepting, super forward school, which is a luxury for me. But in any school I've ever worked at, I've always been very clear that I will always be out to students, and that is a choice that I have made. But I think it's really important for me to be the adult that I wish that I had had when I was a kid. There was absolutely no one, I didn't meet anyone knowingly who was gay until I was at university. And Graham and I were both in school in the UK when it was illegal for teachers to talk to kids about being gay. There was a law called Section 28, which was put in by Margaret Thatcher, and it was completely disallowed that teachers were allowed to acknowledge, encourage, whatever for any young people to be gay. And it was a very, very difficult time and very isolating. So I feel like, especially when you work in an international school, when you've got kids coming from a huge range of different cultures and backgrounds and beliefs, I think it's really important to see somebody living a positive life as a gay person. So I will always be open. I appreciate that that's not possible for anybody, and that is my choice, and I completely respect people's choices as well. But I feel like I've only ever had positive relationships with students as a result of it. And I think that it's something that's important to me as working as a school. So I try and make it as normal as possible, but I think that also creates a safe space. So students feel like they can come to me about being gay or concerns about being gay because I'm a gay person. But there's lots of things that you can do if you're not gay to try and make your space as a counsellor safe. And as a university, I love it when universities talk about the fact that they have a pride on campus, just because it opens that conversation, it makes it feel like a safe thing for students. So a university gave me a rainbow lanyard that I now wear around campus, which is a good thing that students can see that I'm even more rainbow. Some teachers have like rainbow stickers on their doors. There's lots of things that you can do just to show that you are a really accepting person. Like, I don't think you need to be gay to be someone that students feel that they can be comfortable talking to about gender or sexual orientation. But I think there's stuff that you can do to make that space safer for students. When we had our planning meeting, Susan shared a really amazing thing about gender terms. So your pronouns that I now have in my email signature. It's excellent. And it's just a really, really simple thing that I would never have thought of. But it will firstly stop the Chinese parents calling me Mr. Digby. And secondly, now it allows for people to know that I will respect their pronouns if that's what they choose. So what have I got on my slide? So we talked a bit, I think Graham talked a bit about the kind of being safety and trying to encourage students to be safe when they're kind of exploring a new world of excitement. And that's definitely true when we talk about things like Tinder and Grindr. Like, this is the first time that they can really go wild, and it's an exciting time for them. And I try and strike a really good balance in terms of not frightening them as well. Like for me and a lot of people, when they go to university, there are a lot of risks that you can take, but for a lot of people, that's the time where they really find kind of their family. You know, they find people who accept them unconditionally and love them, regardless of whatever expression that they have for themselves. So it's trying to strike that balance. I think we do it as well with consent as counsellors. We're always frightening students to the point of, you know, getting consent or making sure someone has consented, or you know, that date rape is rife everywhere. And I think that we need to try and also strike the balance, like that university is really exciting, and actually the majority of universities are really, really accepting places. You know, these are highly educated people who embrace diversity, you know, nationalities, sexual orientations, abilities. Like, it really is a safe space, and it's trying to kind of make them feel excited about it while still making them aware of the differences. It still will be the case that, not yet, it still will be the case that they will have difficult conversations with people. So people will not necessarily understand your terms that you're coming from. You know, they might not have heard pansexual, they may not have heard asexual, queer might be totally new to them. And if you come from a really accepting international school where everyone's very woke, and you go to somewhere in the middle of nowhere where they haven't heard it, usually people are interested and generous, but they will probably ask stupid questions. They'll probably ask incredibly personal questions, and they'll probably be mild to moderately inappropriate. But it's about trying to be kind and understanding with people, and trying to not react in a way. So we do a lot of practice and role play that I'll talk about in a bit. So things that you can do as a counsellor, I think the most important thing that you can do is give students the words. Like, it's very, very hard when you're in a situation that you've never been in before not to react in an explosive fashion, or run away and hide and cry and then want to leave university. So it's about trying to give them the words where they can really, really stand up for themselves, but also represent themselves in a really, really good way. So I get students to write a letter. This is a very, you know, one of the favorite university application supplements is writing a letter to your roommate. But we like to do it, so, you know, write a letter to your future professor, write a letter to, you know, be your residence assistant. So write a letter to people you're going to come into contact, but presenting yourself as kind of the version that you want to present yourself at. So not everyone knows the time that, you know, you fell down the stairs and landed in a bin, or not, you know, no one knows when you were sick on the school bus when you were 7. Like, you leave all of that behind. Like, this is your total fresh start. You know, no one's going to call you any names. Like, how is it that you want to present yourself? So you can write that letter, and it just gives you the kind of understanding of yourself, so you're able to tell your story in a much clearer way because you've had it all written down rather than trying to think on the spot. So how you want to present yourself, what, you know, if there's a sexual orientation, like, what would you like people to describe it as? And okay, how would you explain that? And you can do this in different ways. So for some people, if you've got loads of really confident kids, then maybe a group work is a really a nice place to do that. Sometimes you might want to bring kids in pairs. I've got some really, really shy kids who this would mortify them. So for them, we'll do it as a Google Doc, and we can have a discussion as a Google Doc. And for them, that works really, really well. And it takes a bit of the intimidation out of it, but it's still working together, and we can get that kind of ideas down in a way that makes them kind of feel comfortable. Then we'll also do something around role-playing activities. And maybe we'll ask questions like, so you're attracted to X, and how would you respond to that if it's the different gender than you're attracted to? How would you respond to if someone said, are you gay? How would you respond if someone said, you look gay in that? Whether you're straight or gay, these are really good questions to ask, because you can make really safe responses, or you can make really, really crap responses. One of my students, we were talking about, one of the questions was, oh, people like that make me sick. And he said, I'm like that. Would you like a bucket? Like, cool and resilient. Like, so there, but it is really nice. I had someone's good response that was empowering. Then it gives you a bit more strength behind yourself, and that's what we're really keen to give our students, I think, when they're looking forward to the future.
Jade, I'm going to just move us along a little bit because we want to make sure we have some time for some questions as well, and Dane will be coming up in a moment.
So my last slide, I'll be really swift. So this is just, I think the biggest challenge as a counsellor is the parents. Although I'm not counselling them, you do spend a lot of time doing it anyway. So just trying to, when you do have a non-binary kid or someone on the queer spectrum, it's about trying to find a place for them that they feel safe and happy. So parents often have a very fixed idea, and that's not necessarily what's in the best interest of the student. And I always say, like, I am 100% there for them. So often what we're doing is master manipulating the parents, whether that is finding a very niche course somewhere in a very safe state, or finding universities that really meet the needs of that student. So some universities have incredible, transition programs and things like that. Or finding a university that is the perfect fit for the student for loads of different reasons, and then convincing the parents that that's the way. So whether that's, bamboozling them with facts that they can tell their friends at cocktail parties is our usual favorite one. And then in the worst case scenario, if we can't find somewhere that's a good fit for the student and the parents are pushing and there's no other option, we do everything we can to prepare the best safety net for that student. So finding local queer youth organizations, finding allies, maybe alumni from our school that are in the area who can provide extra support for that student.
Excellent. Thank you for some very good tips there. And I think both supporting the students and how to talk and tell their story when they get to university, things to watch out for. And I like the approach with parents as well. And so we'll go from the UK all the way over to the West Coast of the United States. And Dane has some words for us as well.
Yeah, and thank you, Susan and Graham and Janie. That great information. I love the master manipulation, because I think one of the things I hear from on the university side from high school counselors, especially with students who are working with incredibly rigid or very conservative cultures, that process is really scary for the students and the counselors as well. And in fact, the first session that was done in a long time in the organization came about because a counselor from Hong Kong came up to me at a college fair and said, "Hey, you're a religious school. I've got students who are transitioning. Would they be safe at your school? I'm really worried about them." So a counselor expressing real sincere concern about a student is one of the ways that we continue to build these skill sets that we have. One thing I want to make clear really quick is that I am coming at this from a very US-centric perspective in terms of the university side. So the fact that I won't be discussing a lot about the campus climate or the environments or the resources that might be available for students looking at UK or European universities. And there's a difference often in culture and welcoming of LGBTQ students and also non-binary students between Eastern and Western Europe for sure. Certainly parts of Asia are very different. I think by and large, Canada is a pretty welcoming place for students that are going to be expressing themselves in different ways. But that is something that's important, and maybe to put a call out for those that might be looking for a chat topic or a session topic to maybe look at some of these issues from a different perspective, a non-Western perspective, would be helpful. But some things I want to add on the university perspective from the US. Thinking about what I mentioned, the perspective from a religious institution. I happen to represent a religious institution that has that marker in my middle name, California Lutheran University. And across the United States, there's a wide spectrum of religious institutions. And Aaron, you can switch the next slide if you can. The really wide spectrum where some students discount a university based on the religious marker in the name, where in fact it would be an incredibly welcoming place, versus some institutions that don't have that religious marker. Students choose that place and then get there and realize, wait, this is not a place that's safe for me. There's not a club or an opportunity for me. And beyond that, location is so important in the US, whether we're talking about, in this case, we're talking about gender and sexual identity. a university may be incredibly progressive and very welcoming, and the student can use whatever toilet they want on campus. But heaven forbid they're off campus and have to go. In some states, that's not going to be as readily available to them, and those choices. And so that's a very real thing. And I wish we could say that every state in the United States is as welcoming as every other and has laws in the book that protect transitioning or transgender students. But that's just not the case. And so here's some resources through Human Rights Council. There's state maps that show laws, and they actually have kind of a shaded ranking of states in the United States that have laws that protect versus laws that inhibit or harm LGBTQ people. We'll talk a little bit about, in a minute, I'll talk about the college application process or things we can do. So we can go on the next slide. These are things that students through Campus Pride have shared about things they're looking for in US universities. And you can read through this, where I would say for high school counselors, certainly, helping students tease some of these things out and giving them language and giving them tools, looking at campus websites, looking at course listings. So for example, if a university has a queer theology class that's a religious university, you can bet that university is going to be pretty inclusive and very, very welcoming for that student. So looking deeper than just trying to find a rainbow flag on the website, but actually looking at visible signs at the institution structurally and academically for students. Beyond that, though, there are some other resources for students. I mentioned Campus Pride. There's Stonewall, which a couple of the counselors here really recommended highly. The Point Foundation offers guidance, but also scholarships for students who identify as LGBTQ. And then listen.org has some incredible educational resources for students, for parents, for educators as well. And as you'll see in a few slides, there's about 4 slides worth of resources and documentation that we'll go through. Universities on the road. I really encourage universities to work into their elevator speech, work into their workshops, ways that they can send markers to the students that your institution is a safe place. Now, you do have to manage some cultural contexts. I know we have a couple of high schools here represented that are very, very progressive and very inclusive. I've been to some schools in countries where the owners of the school made it clear that counselors are not to talk about this issue. In those cases, sometimes I kind of read the room and I may still talk about it. And there's some times that I've had some incredibly open conversations with young people with some hushed voices when maybe in my 30-second elevator pitch, I've talked about our Pride Club, and then I get a nervous young person come up and saying, I'm looking for a place that's going to be safe, but my parents can't know, can you help me? And I think as university counselors, sometimes in countries where they don't have counselors that of this caliber or don't have counselors at all, sometimes as university counselors, we become their confidants and counselors. And so I think by sending out signals, we can really empower young people. Something really boring, but something really powerful is our inquiry cards, what we have on our slate profiles, how we're asking for gender can be really important for students. And then on campus, really, if you don't have a safe zone program, fight for it. If your database system doesn't help students in the classroom, if the professors don't know which name they want to be called, then those are things that we can do. We know which data group we can go to, whether you're at a big institution or a small one. I think those of us that work in international admission know how to work the angles and kind of work the politics and find ways to make changes on campus. One thing that I do want to call out that's really important in terms of advocacy is health insurance. If you go, like I did to NAFSA a couple years ago, I went and asked every single insurance health provider for US universities, do they provide coverage for transitioning services, either pre, during, and surgery or post transitioning services, and none of them do. They all say it's way too expensive, they can't do it. There's some things that we need to do to help our universities become a place where a student who may need to transition to save their lives, and in many cases it could save their life. So those are some things we can continue to do on campus at the university perspective. Now, why do we do this? And for me, why am I talking about this as a cisgender straight guy? 94% of universities don't have explicit protection for transgender students. 87% don't prohibit discrimination based on orientation. This is based on universities, based on some Campus Pride, as well as some other research done by some folks in academia. 63% of students hide their gender identity. I think every year that number is going down, so fewer and fewer students are hiding. But at the time that I gathered this data, only slightly over half of universities actually had pride clubs. And then if you look at the number of institutions that actually have a full-time support person for LGBTQ students, it's very, very low. And so there are some really important things that we're looking at from a retention standpoint and from student wellness and student persistence. This is really important. There really is a limited amount of research, and there's even less research on this for international students. So all this data is based on US-based LGBTQ students. Doesn't really, obviously they may include international students, but we don't have this data separated out. But a third of sexual minority students either drop out of university or stop out at some point. And why? I think we can imagine. One of them is that they're working through discrimination. There's a term called spoiled identity. I think that's kind of a weighted term, but the concept is that the young person doesn't have any kind of role model to look up to help them understand their own identity. They've only had to react to what society's told them they are. And so through that adolescent and through that kind of psychosocial development, they're still trying to figure out and put together an identity that's their own instead of one that's just been projected on themselves. And while they're dealing with intersecting identities and dealing with CVIS regulations and everything else that we're talking about with international students, the danger for students in terms of harmful behaviors as well as just not being able to graduate is really high. And part of that is the universities don't collect, and the US government and also all the different survey instruments that are out there for institutional research, they don't collect data on sexual identity, and so there's not a lot of longitudinal data. So this is another call out for people that want to do sessions or PhD or doctoral research. I love these pictures because it just shows a variety of perspectives at a university. A lot of these are University of Vermont and ways that they've found ways to mark that they are welcoming places. And my last slide, and as I jump off my soapbox, what can you do now on the university side? And I think this is true for counselors too. Connect with allies on and off campus. Identify your culture. There's a lot that all of us can do to make things better. If you're not very well, if the leaders of the Pride Club on your campus don't know who you are, then introduce yourself, connect with them. And that way you can also introduce them to your prospective students when they want to know what your campus climate is like. And I think that these things can continue to create momentum and invite safety for students and be able to help them thrive at the university. So in closing, if you want, Aaron, if you want to flip through the next couple slides, there's a lot of resources, citations. There's a lot of folks that I wish I could individually shout out to that have helped put a lot of these things together over the last several years, including a lot of other folks that have presented at CIS Forum and International ACAC. There's so many people that continue to contribute to this body of research that we have. We're always looking for more resources, so you have them. Please share them with us. And then the last slide is our emails. So if you have a desire to look up any of these resources or add to the body of research that we're trying to gather about these topics, please feel free to email any one of us. So if you have questions or want to talk a little bit more, or even connect with one of us to put a session together, I think we're all happy to do that. All right, so how are we doing on time, Aaron?
Really good. We've got about 10, 12 minutes here, and I thank all of you. Thanks for running it out here, Dane. I take back what was it? I think it was Susan earlier saying, and her story about talking to the individual in the taxi, and how I think that what we all can do is talk with someone else today about this session, and we may be surprised that even just mentioning what we were doing this morning, this afternoon, this evening in this session, it'll start a conversation, and that may spur someone else to have another conversation with someone else, and help a colleague or help a student. So we do have some questions. We do have some time for some questions. So we've got a good group of people from all over the world that are joining us right now, and so while we provided a whole lot of information, there may still be some items that people are wondering about, and we've got a good selection of resources, individuals here that can help you out. So on your control panel there, those attendees, you can click open your control panel. You'll find a question box there, and just type the question in there on the screen. I'm reminded of one of my experiences as a presenter. I think that made me think about the language that we use is so important. And this was a few years ago where I kind of tell a joke and then I look to the audience and then they go, oh well, and I in the past I always say I kind of look at someone and say, you young man, you could perhaps someday be the future president of the United States or wherever I am. And then this large group I did that in. The person I just sort of randomly picked because they were engaged earlier, the person looked at me and quietly said, but I'm a girl. And it was something that enough people around them heard that. And as soon as I looked at the individual, I was like, yeah, and then I realized what I said. So I think it's circumstances like that I still remember that. But it's also made me conscious that I think whether a university presenter or just a presenter in an environment, thinking about the language we use and thinking about anything, even things that such as, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this event. These are circumstances like that where we can find folks, friends, welcome to this event, things like that, where we can think about ways that we can be more inclusive to the audience and to our colleagues. Here we have a question from Surna. She's asking specifically, Jani, in one of your slides, you mentioned creating a safe place. What kind of advice do you give to seniors to do that?
Did I say this?
Yes, I believe the question, Cerna, is that remembering is something on your slide where you talked about creating a safe place, and any advice on how you can work with your seniors to create their safe space, or maybe inspire them to talk with others to create a safe space,
I think when I was talking about when we have the role play, so how we create a safe space. So, I mean, at this school, it's so ridiculously safe. Like, I am so frightened about saying the wrong thing because the kids know everything. Like, they're so remarkable. But in terms of the seniors, like what we try and do a lot of is learning about language, like how the importance of language. So we talk about things like the semantics of sexism. When we look at violence against women, we look at the fact that, you know, someone who was beaten by a man suddenly becomes a battered woman. It takes the man entirely out of the process. So we look at all kinds of things about how language is so powerful with what we do. But I think that in terms of creating a safe space, it's about teaching students about kindness. Like, I think overall it's just about kindness. Like, generally people don't want to hurt somebody else. Like, that's not what they want to do at all. And kindness comes from thinking about your words and being considerate, but also being accepting and kind to other people when they say terrible things to you. And we're trying to strike that balance with, and it doesn't work. Like, we have 92 different nationalities represented on our campus. So even with our super woke, amazing kids, like, people will say the wrong thing and people will be hurt and feelings will be hurt. So I definitely am not an expert in terms of making things perfectly safe, but it's about trying to also rebuild and have those conversations. Like, we're trying to teach really, really good storytelling skills and really, really good communication skills. So how to present yourself as the best and most authentic version of yourself, and how to communicate with somebody when they hurt your sense of self. So how you can have that conversation, how you can open that conversation in a way that isn't an attack on them, because the difficulty is that when you are hurt, you will often say something quite sternly back at them, and that creates tension that ratchets up very, very quickly. So it's about trying to approach that communication with, this really hurt me and this is why, and then being able to take that feedback as well. So we do a lot of practice around the conversation, especially for our kids who are new to the English language as well. It can be a really, really tricky time, and I definitely don't have all the answers, but yeah, it's definitely communication and kindness are what we're going for in terms of a safe space.
Can I add to that? In my school, some teachers have on the windows of the classroom or on the door, they have like a rainbow heart sticker, which lets students know that that classroom is a safe space to talk about anything to do with sexuality or gender. So the teacher in the classroom is welcoming. They are not only accepting to use the terms that Susan talked about, but they're happy to talk to students if they are having an issue with it. And another thing that we have done in our school is we've created a gender non-specific uniform, which creates an atmosphere in school that, gender is not an issue for us in school, so kids can wear what they want, and that will not be a problem. So they can express themselves through their clothes in a way that suits them.
Mm.
So
Yeah, we
Jenny,
have
yeah, I just wanted to cut up one other question here that might spur some further discussion. I want to make sure we have time to get to this one. And that Zoe's asking a question that is really good for this international group, and that is how to discuss these issues in countries where it is still illegal to be gay. And I suspect that I don't know if any of you have worked in any of those countries, but I know certainly we have members in our organization that are. Any thoughts, Graham or Danny, Susan, Dane?
I used to work in Hong Kong where it's not illegal to be gay, but it's we actually left Hong Kong because it's illegal for us to have children in Hong Kong. And I was very open with my students as to why we were leaving because of it. But it's a really difficult thing to talk about. But it being illegal isn't illegal to discuss it. We were, as I said, Graham and I grew up in a time where it was illegal to even talk about it. But I think you can absolutely have these conversations about positivity in the future too. Like as a university counselor, you're often giving students a pass for freedom and excitement and acceptance somebody else, and that's somewhere else, and that's a really exciting thing to be giving someone. But it is a challenge. Hong Kong was an incredibly conservative country in a lot of ways. Like it's a very kind of open part of Asia, but it's still there's very traditional values. Racism is a pretty serious thing. There's a very serious class system. There's a lot of issues around sexual orientation, and there's just no acceptance that you can marry somebody else. Same-sex marriage is not legal or allowed. So it is difficult having those conversations, but it's about trying to support your student in any way you can to make them feel safe and loved. Just because the law said that this isn't okay, here's all the reasons why it is okay. Here's really good examples of people who live really happy, positive, full lives. And it's important to highlight that.
Yeah, I think that's really key. I think helping build up the students' hope that it will get better, that they can find a lot of times in very conservative, especially based on religious context, young people are told that they'll never be loved, that they will find rejection, that they'll never have monogamy, they'll never find anything that is safe in those relationships. And so as counselors, we can counter that, whether it's illegal in the country or not. I think the other thing that I've noticed is I think the funding that students will seek at universities becomes even more important if they are going to come out when they get to university, because that financial independence from their parents, it becomes really important. Because what happens if a student from a country where they get outed, maybe in social media, they get death threats back home by family or others, and then their parents revoke their funding, they're stuck. And so I think using the networks within our international organization to help those students find really secure funding opportunities at university becomes, in some cases, it's not too much to overstate that it could become a life or death situation for some of those young people. And so I think the partnerships that we have in this organization are so key with these kinds of cases where discretion is important, where the family can't know, not just that the student doesn't want them to know, but really can't. So I think reaching out to people and kind of seeking advice would be something I would say to that counselor that's trying to navigate some of those tough cultural waters.
I think also talking about it as a school, certainly having a pride club, for example, might be a challenge in a country like that. But just speaking as a school, as administration, at what point does the school want to either take a stand or be representative? And if it continues to be a school that is conservative, and of course the country is conservative in this regard, this is perhaps where I think it was Damon was mentioning that the university representatives who are visiting could perhaps be an ally in this regard. If I know certainly I've visited UAE, for example, many times, and where it is still illegal to be gay. And I've have never hesitated in my presentations to talk about UBC's pride events and support. So this is where it might be ways that we, as university external visitors, can provide a small support in that regard to your students. So I see now it is top of the hour here, and where we wrapped up our questions. It's great to see that all of you attendees have stuck with us through all the end, and I really appreciate you spending an hour with us. We're wrapping up our time here, and so thank you to the panelists. Thank you to our attendees for joining us. We'll be back next Wednesday, next month for another webinar Wednesday. But for now, feel free to check us out online. The session will be recorded. All the resources, you can feel free to email either of us here or check out the slides themselves will be available to download in a day or two. And final public closing announcement here is to remember that we have many applications open right now if you want to get involved in International ACAC committee applications, executive board applications. So if you want to contribute and become more formally involved in our association, this is a great opportunity. It's a great time of year. So check us out at internationalacac.org. But that's it for me. I think this is it for the webinar Wednesday for January. Thanks very much. Have a good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.